Elementary music teacher friend, you love what you do, but you might feel unappreciated and, in fact, unseen some days. You may even feel like you're on a music teacher island and just want to connect with other music teachers who can relate to both your struggles and wins when it comes to teaching elementary music. I get you and understand completely the feelings you're having. That's why each and every week, the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast will provide you with solo and guest episodes that will help you realize you're not alone in your music teaching journey. Throughout each episode, my goal is for you to be able to walk away with actionable steps and ideas to help you feel like you're ready to take on the new week with whatever challenges may be thrown your way. Hi, I'm your host, Jessica Peresta, and I'm so glad you're here. Whether you're at home, in your car, in the shower, or wherever else you're listening, grab your cup of coffee or whatever other beverage is nearby and listen in to the Elementary Music Teacher Podcast. Welcome back, everyone. I am joined today by Allison Russo, and she is going to be talking today about bringing guest artists into your classroom. This is something I'm so excited to pick her brain about. So before we talk, though, I would love you, Allison, to just go ahead and introduce yourself to our listeners today.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Jessica. I'm really excited to be here. This is a topic that I'm very passionate about. So a little bit about me. Right now, I'm an educational consultant, and my consultant company is called The Critical Good. And my main focus is on creating ethical and effective learning spaces in the arts classrooms in and out of schools. So I focus on critical pedagogy, social emotional learning, and basically how large cultural issues like bias trickle down and manifest themselves negatively or positively in classrooms. So my background is in music education. I used to be an elementary school band teacher, the little itty bitty squeaks and squawks. And after I finished teaching, you never finish teaching. I did a pretty long stint working with a nonprofit here in New Jersey, teaching jazz education in New Jersey. And so I was managing a bunch of programs there, education programs there. And right now I'm a consultant. So I provide training and coaching and consulting for teachers and teaching artists. That's a term I'll be using 17,000 times today. And the administration and the organizations that support the teachers. So I help everyone try to make more ethical and effective learning spaces.
Love it. I love hearing about different teachers that come on the podcast, your journeys, because I get asked this a lot. So I'm sure you do too. Did you always know you wanted to own your own business? And I was like, no, that wasn't I didn't go to get my degree in music education thinking I thought I'd be in the classroom for 30 years, but I just think it's so cool to hear about people's journey. So that's so cool. The work you're doing.
That is one thing I kind of wish they had told us in music school was like, you don't just have to be in the classroom forever. There's a lot of other options out there. And not that I didn't like being in the classroom. That was like one of my favorite things that I've ever done in my entire life. But you can work with a nonprofit. You can be a consultant. You can be, there's so many other things you can do with an education degree, even a music education degree.
Oh, yes.
I just want to spread that gospel.
Yes, it's so true. I know. Oh, I love that so much. Okay, so you've already mentioned this phrase, teaching artist, and that is what we're talking about today. And when we were emailing back and forth and you said this is what you wanted to come on the podcast to talk about, I got so excited. First of all, we haven't had this conversation on the podcast. And second of all, it's something I'm curious about as well. So,
Great. Happy to help.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about, first of all, what experience do you have with bringing guest artists into your classroom? And let's just kind of start there.
Sure. So the very first time that I had an experience with bringing a guest into my classroom when I was a public school, elementary school band teacher, and the guest that I brought in actually wasn't a musician. It was actually a scientist. So this is a little kind of a strange place to start, but this is how I started. I wrote a grant to do an interdisciplinary arts and science this was before the term STEAM became vogue, but it was a STEAM program that I did that was based around dinosaurs, because kids love dinosaurs. I love dinosaurs. Everyone loves dinosaurs. So I was doing a piece with my band called Prehistoric Suite, which is a total classic, and it's really, really fun. And I wrote this grant to bring in a scientist from the Museum of the Earth, which is in Ithaca, which is where I was teaching. And they came in and showed the kids, this is what, like a replica of the fossils, and this is how the dinosaurs move. This is what we think they sound like. And so we were able to make connections with, this is why the composer made these musical decisions, because these dinosaurs looked and behaved, we think, in the following ways. So that was my first time writing a grant. That was my first time bringing in a guest. And it was incredibly thrilling, because I was able to do something that was way beyond my capabilities. Nobody wants to listen to a band teacher talk about paleontology. I'm not a paleontologist. And it's just not, I'm not the person to talk to about how dinosaurs move. I can make guesses and I can Google it, but that's just not as good as somebody who's spent their lives caring about how dinosaurs look and move. So that was my first time like bringing in an official guest. And I had also brought in a composer who was actually one of my mentors from college, who I was doing one of his pieces. So he came and conducted and spoke to the kids, and they did a little Q&A. And so those were some of the guest things that I did when I was a teacher. And when I moved on to the nonprofit, my job was actually hiring the teaching artists to go into schools. I also did a little bit of being a teaching artist myself. So I've kind of seen this process from all sides. I have been the teacher, the cooperating teacher. I have been the teaching artist that goes into the school. And I have been the administrator who hires the teaching artist to go to a school. So I have a very unique position to be able to see the many different sides and the ups and downs of bringing a guest into your classroom.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Well, we're definitely going to ask you so many questions about that. I say I am, but our listeners are wondering the same thing.
Okay. I'm imagining an audience.
Yes. Yeah. I always do that. I pretend everybody's just sitting here with me, because the questions I ask, I want, Okay. First of all, I have to say, not to get too far off track, but when you said paleontologist, I thought of Ross from Friends. I couldn't help it. Have you seen Friends? Have you seen Friends?
I mean, I've seen Friends. I'm not like really into Friends. I don't get a lot of the references.
Yeah. Okay. Well, he was a paleontologist on the show, so it just
was he really?
Yes. So I don't know why my brain went there. Anyways, not to get too far off track, but that's how Jessica's brain works sometimes.
That's fine. That's how a brain works. Don't worry.
Yeah. So I love this so much. So I was thinking when you were talking, when I was in my classroom, there was one of my students, her dad played guitar like super well. And everybody kept telling me about, you got to bring this guy in to play guitar. And I don't think he was even a performing artist. And he just played guitar really well. And everybody in the community kind of knew about him. And I was like, well, why not? Like, why would I not? And so I brought it, because I can't play guitar. I can strum a few chords here or there, but I would not say I'm proficient. And so I was like, this, especially I felt like for my 4th and 5th graders, how cool would that be for them to be able to see? So he came in, and I just remember that experience of just having someone different in the classroom and having them see someone else playing a live instrument instead of me just saying, a guitar sounds like this, let's listen to a recording, them being able to see. So that was such a simple thing, but he was so excited to come in. The students were excited for him to come in. And that was my first experience with that, was like, oh, this is a thing. I didn't even know this was a thing. Nobody really talks about it. So when you were talking about it, it is like, I mean, it's going to look different now because of COVID, we can get into that, but you can still definitely do this with your, in your classroom in one way or another.
Right. Yes. Yeah. There's the podcast. We're done.
Yes. Right. Exactly. Mic drop. Boom. Done. Let's walk out. Okay. So you've talked about your experience. I just shared a story of mine, but why? You've already mentioned that and I just said that too, bringing someone else in your classroom, they may have an experience or be able to share something with your students that you don't have knowledge about. So is that the main reason you encourage music teachers to bring guest artists in their classroom? And do you have other reasons that you would encourage other reasons that music teachers should be able to bring artists into their classroom?
Right. That's one of the main reasons, is that you as a music teacher know a lot, but you don't know everything. And you're only from your own culture. You can only bear your own culture. You cannot have grown up knowing every genre or every language. You have to, I was almost going to say outsource. Outsource is not the right word, and I will get to the reason why. But that's one of the main reasons, is to bring in somebody who is authentically part of a culture. Because when you bring a new genre in, you're bringing in a new culture. When you're teaching a song, you're teaching part of a culture. So you can't be everyone all the time. That's several different topics right there. Mm-hmm. So bringing in an artist or another guest who can speak from either a professional standpoint or otherwise very experienced standpoint, shows the students all of these possibilities that are not just coming from your lips. So that example that you gave, that student's father was just a great guitarist, and you can demonstrate, okay, but here's really what a guitar sounds like. You weren't just showing how you play guitar better, or a technique or a tone or anything like that. You're showing, hey, this is a person who is still playing music throughout their lives and enjoying it. And maybe he is a computer programmer during the day, but he is playing guitar and it makes him feel good. And that's something that you can carry throughout your whole life. You don't have to be a professional musician. So just bringing in a musician is not just bringing in the music, but it's also bringing in the person. So another related reason why this is a really great thing to do to bring in a guest is that you can, especially if you don't look like your students. So if you're a white person who's teaching in a primarily Black and brown school, bringing in an artist who does look like your students just opens up a whole bunch of possibilities. It seems logical, like from an adult brain perspective, to be able to say, oh, I can do whatever I want. It doesn't matter what I look like. I can be a professional oboe player if I want to. But if you've never seen a professional oboe player who looks like you, especially for a kid, they don't necessarily make that leap in logic. Mm-hmm. They're going to be like, oh, well, people who look like me don't play the oboe. I don't know, I picked the oboe, but
yeah, I know what you mean. Mm-hmm.
So it just makes it real. It makes it real for kids that there are more possibilities out there than what I can show you or what the internet can show you. It just makes it real. Also making a connection to your community. So bringing in that dad that you spoke about, mm-hmm. Or other people who are just kind of like famous in your community, helps students remember that music doesn't stop when they leave the classroom. And it just creates that, it takes down those barriers that sometimes aren't easy to do when it's just you. But yes, so bringing in something that you can't do, something mm-hmm. that you can't authentically do. Mm-hmm. Putting on a costume and, inching your way towards cultural appropriation is not, let's just not do it. Let's just not do it. Yeah. If you can bring in somebody who can do it for real, well, then it's real.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And and like you said, a lot of kids just see music class as just music class. This is a class I take, it stops mm-hmm. here.
Right.
But yeah, the example of the dad, like he plays guitar for fun, and every student doesn't need to be a professional musician, but like teaching them life skills of how you can enjoy music outside of even, into adulthood is mm-hmm. so important. And like you said, them seeing someone who looks like them and, yes. and they experiencing music that maybe it's a hip hop artist you bring into your right. classroom. I am not going to try to, do a rap or hip hop in front of you because it would be nope. an epic failure. Bring someone in who can. I remember right. a jazz ensemble came into my mm-hmm. school. That was so cool. And I'm a classically trained pianist, so I don't have a lot of experience with playing jazz music. I could have pretended or tried or played a recording, which I did all those things, but something different about just seeing it's like you said, the connection points, them seeing these artists, these musical artists or guests coming into their school. It really does form connections. That might be that child's first time ever to experience a live musician. And
Yes.
it's just so neat you bringing those
Yeah.
opportunities to them. It's just so cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And building off of that, another reason why, you're not a jazz musician, that's fine. You don't have to be a jazz musician. You don't have to identify as a jazz musician. But when you do bring in a jazz musician, you learn something too, you as the teacher. And this is something that I hope your teachers and your listeners listen to this very carefully. When you bring a guest into your classroom, they're not just there for your kids. They are there for you too. And please compensate them for their time. But if you have the opportunity to take a lesson with them, just pick their brain for an hour, absorb as much information as you can from them. Please do that. If there's some sort of, logistical issue where you can really only they get in and they get out, but you need to absorb as much from them as you can, because then you can, when you aren't bringing in a guest, because obviously you can't bring in a guest every minute of every day, you can still speak to your students more authentically, more knowledgeably about a genre or an instrument or whatever topic, because you've gotten that professional development from that guest. You have to take advantage of that. Have to take advantage of that.
That makes so much sense. Yes.
I've brought in, I'll tell you, this is a horror story. This is a horror story. We
all have them. We all do.
This is a horror story of there was nothing wrong with the guest, but it was the cooperating teacher that we were working with. So this is when I was with the nonprofit. We brought a Grammy award-winning jazz bassist to this school and spoiled the hell out of these kids. They were just learning so much from this guest, and it was such a big deal, and the kids had such a great time. And the cooperating teacher stood in the corner with his arms folded, did not even introduce himself to the guest, and left early. Oh my God. I couldn't even figure out the words to say.
Oh my gosh.
What is wrong with you?
Right.
That's what not to do, because here is a person who has several Grammys under his belt, is the warmest, most welcoming, happy to share his knowledge with you person. And you just squander it. You just leave early because he was so threatened by his presence that he didn't want to have anything to do with it. And that was a massively missed opportunity for him as a teacher, but also set this really kind of nasty tone for the students of oh, well, this is not my music teacher, so he doesn't know anything. Wrong. What a missed opportunity for everyone. So when you bring a guest in, obviously, if you're the person who's specifically going out and hiring it, you're probably not going to stand in the corner all, grumpy. But if you're not hiring somebody because you feel threatened by their presence, think about what you're missing out on by, digging your heels in and being protective of, exactly what your students hear. Take a little bit of a risk. Maybe your students are going to hear something or see something or experience something that you didn't expect, but it's going to be a good surprise. Imagine it being a good surprise, because it's probably going to be something that the kids keep with them for years.
Yeah.
So take the risk. Be a little scared. Bring somebody into your classroom, even if it makes you a little bit nervous or a little bit threatened.
I love
it. It's good for everyone.
Oh, I love that. It's so true. Yes, it's your classroom. It's your baby. That's where, that's where you do your work, right? You're the teacher. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with the guest artist coming in and an expert. Let's be honest. They're experts.
Yeah,
there's no way you know how to play every instrument, about every genre, style, everything. Those people do. They're in there, whether you brought them in or someone else brought them in for a reason. So like you said, learn from them, have a conversation with them, let it help you grow as a musician and as a teacher. I love that you said that, because I can't even imagine someone coming in my classroom, me just standing there offended. Why?
It's the worst.
It
was the worst.
I don't even know why. That's not.
I know. Well, that's a whole other conversation.
Oh, yeah.
But
yes.
that was 101, here's what not to do.
Yes.
What not to do.
So you talked about finding artists to come into the classroom.
Right.
So someone listening and they're like, this is really intriguing. I would love to do this, but
Yes.
how do I do that? How do I go about finding these people to come in?
So there's a lot of different ways to do this, and it's going to depend on your own community and where you live. So I'm going to give a whole bunch of examples here of what you could possibly do. If you live in an area like I do, I live 12 miles from Manhattan, you have 1,000 billion options. So if you live in a highly populated area, there's probably several nonprofit music organizations and or performance halls or performing groups that you can tap into. And there's going to be, if you already know them, if they're already established, great, just go on their website. There's going to be a program manager or something similar to that, or an education director. You call them or email them and you say, I would like to have a teaching artist, or I'm looking for this sort of experience for my students. And they will fall over themselves to help you, because that's their job, is to bring their artists to your classroom. That I can't, as somebody who used to be that person, like a nonprofit director or, like education director, all I ever wanted was for a teacher to call me up and say, please send one of your artists to my school. That's what I wanted to happen constantly. So it's not a weird request. I have an anxiety about that. Like, what do I even say? What are the words that I say? You say, I'm looking for a teaching artist to talk to my students about improvisation, to talk to my students about composition, to do a residency, whatever you have floating around in your mind, that education director or program manager is going to help you create a program or direct you to a program that they already have that is going to help your students, you and your students. So that is one way to find a guest or a program or something like that, is to connect with a nonprofit or a performing group or something like that. So that's a lot easier when you live in, 12 miles from Manhattan. If you do not, you might have a more success with doing like a virtual visit. We could talk about that for a second. So you can still tap into a semi-local, maybe there's a little long to travel for a school visit, but they're still kind of like in your state. You could do that. Or you can also tap into your very local community. So like you said before, Jessica, having a parent come in, that's a great thing to do. Especially because there's a fairly good likelihood that they're not a professional musician. And that's also great. You don't need to bring in professional musicians. Especially if you have a specific culture that you want to tap into. So for example, if you live in an area that has a very large Native American population, you should contact your local tribal council and they will be able to help you. So those sort of local connections, you don't have to necessarily go to your nearest, symphony hall or opera house, though great if you do. You're looking for people who can make a good connection with your students. I would say the most important thing about hiring a teaching artist, other than, they can do what you're asking them to do, is that they are able to speak to children in an engaging way. And this is one thing that I learned the hard way from when I brought the scientist in, for the paleontologist in.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, I had a couple of different sessions with, coming from the same museum, but they sent this one scientist, twice. And then the third time it was a different scientist, and he was speaking to kindergartners, and it was like he was reading from like an instruction manual. And I was like, no. And this is one of the risks of bringing somebody in, is that sometimes you don't know what you're going to get. And yes, they got the information, but I don't think they enjoyed it at all. And so that was one of this weird situation where I was supposed to have like the person who's good at it, and they couldn't make it this one day. So I got somebody else, and I was like, oh, that happens. Like, this is life, some of these things are out of your hands. Still worth doing. But especially if you're bringing in, well, I was going to say, especially if you're bringing in a non-professional, but even if you're bringing in a professional, make sure that they have education experience, that they have experience talking to kids, even if, it helps if like they're a parent themselves, even if that's it, if they have the ability to talk to small children in an engaging way, they have a big personality, they're kind of funny. It's okay if they're not, first chair in the symphony, because if that person is really boring, then that's not really what you want to bring into your kids. So finding somebody who's not only musically very interesting and can do all the musical things that you need them to do, but somebody who can engage and excite and thrill and be memorable to your students, that is of equal importance. And what they, oh my gosh, what are the words I'm trying to think of? Making sure that they tick any boxes that you're trying to tick with. Maybe you want them to be of a certain background or a certain racial identity or other identity. If you make sure that you want to bring in a female composer, anything like that, make sure that you also have that in mind. And if you speak to a nonprofit organization or a performing group, say specifically, I'm looking for a female composer, and they will be able to help you.
Yeah. Oh, those are such great tips. Oh my gosh. Such great tips. And I love that you even mentioned that you can have a virtual artist, because I know that's probably like a deterrent, I guess,
right.
In this, the last couple of school years is, I want to bring more people in, but I don't know how. Well, you can definitely do virtual. It'll be a little bit of a different experience, but it doesn't mean it's terrible. I was a guest teacher last year for she's been on the podcast, Teresa, and she had taught band, and they were doing a whole unit about podcasting. So she said, do you want to come in and speak to my students about podcasting? It was so fun. So I'm able to help teach them through Zoom about podcasting, and basically just answered any questions these kids had. And so it can be something like that. Maybe you're teaching a specific unit, and you find someone even across the country, or even in another country for that matter. Then zoom in, figure out if you can zoom in with them. And I think that's a great idea. So, yeah.
Virtual visits are sometimes not as ideal, especially if you're trying to do something like technique oriented, or, trying to show your students about a specific instrument, because then they can't be there to see it and touch it and really hear it. But if you want a composer to come in, a sound recording engineer, somebody who can demonstrate a dance for you, something that's a little bit more visual or Q&A oriented, rather than an instrument or singing, or where you have to have really great sound quality, then a virtual visit is great. And you said, you can tap into, organizations that are, and artists that are across the world. And, for example, I had a coaching client who lives in Chicago, and I was connecting him with he has a lot of students who speak Spanish and are actually from Mexico. And I was going to connect him to a jazz artist that I know who's from Mexico and, lives in New Jersey. And there's not a whole lot of Mexican born jazz musicians, in the world. So the fact that I knew one specific person who was also a great educator, and the fact that he lives in a different time zone doesn't have to be a deterrent anymore. It can actually be a really wonderful thing to have these virtual options. So that's the silver lining in the cloud of, not being able to bring people in. It forces you to be a little bit more creative.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier about definitely make sure you pay these particular guests for their work. And I know teachers are listening, are like, how in the world do I do that? How? And I know you get asked that question a lot. So what are your tips around that?
So there's a lot of different options. And again, it's going to depend on the policies of your school. So, the first place you should go if you're trying to figure out how to pay for a guest artist is probably to your supervisor or whoever, you have to buy supplies. Who's telling you how much money you have? Whoever that person is for you, ask them first, how does this get put into the budget? Do I have to wait until next year? start there, because there could be some money laying around. I know that sounds crazy, but there could be some money laying around that's specifically earmarked for bringing in guests or to pay for specific types of things. They can be creative. Sometimes administrators can come up with some good ideas, the creative ones at least. So if that's not an option for it to come out of the school, which it often isn't, grants are probably your next option. Mm-hmm. So there could be grant opportunities through maybe a parent teacher organization or another teacher support organization that's in your school or school district or town, or you might have to look to a county or a state. But often there are arts education, foundations and that have grant opportunities, and you probably don't need a whole ton of money. If you can get a grant for $250, $500, you could probably have a really great 1 or 2 day experience for your students. If you are looking to have a long-term like residency or, a multi-day extravaganza or, a big project where the students finish with writing a musical, you're going to need several $1,000s. And that's probably a grant or something that you write with your administrator to go into the budget for the following year. Mm-hmm. So anything large scale like that, don't try to take it on by yourself, get some help to try to figure that out. But yes, writing grants sounds a lot scarier than it is. Try it. Mm-hmm. I'm also a grant writer and I'm happy to help. So, contact me if you need some help writing some grants. But yes, grants would be the next thing. The other thing that you could do if you have these sort of connections is maybe there could be parents or somebody else in your community, or maybe even a small business in your community that would want to donate the small amount of money. And it could be quote unquote sponsored by the dentist in your town. And it's great PR for them. It's great PR for you. So because we're talking about fairly small amounts of money, maybe a small business in town would like to support you and they feel good and, fresh about it. And then, everybody's happy and you get to bring things to your students. Just make sure you don't break any rules with money. Be careful with money. Just make sure you talk to your administrators first. Yes. No surprises for them.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Don't surprise your administrators.
Someone just randomly shows up to the school and then they see funds missing and they're like, wait, what's going on?
Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that. Make sure you keep everybody in the loop. There's you don't get extra points because it was a surprise. Just,
oh my gosh.
Yes, just make sure that you, ask for permission first.
Yes, cover your bases always. Yes, always.
Yes. But there's money out there and people want to give it to you. Yes. And you have to pay your teaching artists. Please do not ask people to come in for free, especially if that's how they're making their money. If they're a professional musician, you got to pay them, especially if they are a person of color, you got to pay them. You have to pay them and you have to pay them well.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. Yeah. This is their livelihood. This is,
yes.
And yeah, I agree completely.
Yes.
So yes. All right. So I want to ask you this question. When, let's say a teacher gets to the point where they're ready to plan this, and what are some best practices behind that? So what do they do to prepare their students before this guest artist comes? And then what do they do during? And I know that depends. Like you said, it could depend on if it's 1, 2 class periods or a lot of class periods. Yeah. And then let's say after the experience, what typically happens?
Right. Yes. These are great questions. Okay. So before the teaching artist comes in, I'm just going to pick a scenario just because there's a lot of, specifics for certain things, but let's just say you are going to bring a female composer into your classroom and she's going to talk to them about what does a composer do? So, excuse me, little water here.
No, you're fine. I can edit this out.
I just got over like some tonsillitis and I'm it's gross. It's like, it's fine, but when I'm speaking a whole lot, it's...
Oh, I know. Yeah. I've had some nasal stuff, like sinus stuff. So yeah.
It's that change of seasons.
Apart. Oh yeah.
Change of seasons. Okay. So let's say you're bringing in this female composer. So what you should do is, again, it should not be a surprise to your students. So you want to Make sure that your students know that she's coming, who she is, and some basics about what a composer, maybe you don't even need to give some basics about what a composer does, but you should come up with some questions for the composer, for your guest. So make sure that each class, so let's say she's going to stay for the whole day and talk to all your students that you have for that day. Make sure that each class has prepared for her 3 or 4 questions that are a little bit better than like, what's your favorite color? If it's kindergarten, it can be what's your favorite color, but something a little bit more substantial than that for your 4th and 5th graders. So make sure that they know that she's coming and get them excited. So we're going to go with this composition example. If you can play a recording of one of her compositions, and you can do a little bit of listening, or, you know, a little bit of reacting and interpreting, whatever is appropriate for whatever age level you're talking to. So yes, they should come. The students should be not surprised, if at all possible. So during the program, you are going to introduce your guest. You're going to make sure that they are comfortable, that they have everything that they need. Make sure that you talk to your whoever your guest is. Make sure that they know where to go, how to get in, anything that they need to know about security, where to park, all of those sort of things. Don't forget to communicate with your guest or the nonprofit who's sending them in. Make sure that they know all of these logistical things. We're going to need all of that. Is there a piano available? How many students are you speaking to? All of that information needs to be in their pocket already. During the visit, make sure you introduce them well, and mostly get out of their way, but make sure that your job is to make sure that the students are being respectful of the guest's time. You don't necessarily need to read your kids the riot act beforehand, but make sure that they understand that this is a really special thing, and that we only get to see her for one day, so we want to make the most of it, and just kind of keep it light. Nothing really kills the mood other than, like a teacher who's going to scream at their kids in front of a guest, and then, berate them about it, like for 3 weeks afterwards, about how you embarrassed me in front of the guest. Like, don't be that person. So keep it light and keep it fun, but try to help your students stay engaged, because a lot of the guests who are going to come in, even if they're great at talking to kids, are not necessarily great at keeping a classroom focused and on task. So you're going to have to play a little bit of referee there. Make sure if a student is having a particularly difficult time in this class, that you try to take them outside or deal with it later, not in front of the teaching artist or the guest. Because they're a guest. We're trying to be very polite to them. And when you're demonstrating that to the students, you're showing them how important this person is to you and how important they should feel, to the kids. Yeah. So make sure they thank the teaching artist when they're done with their presentation. And afterwards, there's a lot that you can do. Make sure that you unpack with the students, what did you hear? What did you learn? Make the most of whatever information that the teaching artist gave them. Don't just make it an isolated event and say, oh, wasn't that fun? All right, moving on. Let's talk about quarter notes today. Like, try to make it stretch it out as much as you can. Afterwards, also, if you are allowed to, if you can, keep in communication with the teaching artist and let them know that you really appreciated their time. Ask any further questions that you have, or the teaching, or that the students had. And you can also have your students either record or create, or however you want, some thank yous or some follow-up questions, and send them to the artist. First of all, it will warm their heart forever. Second of all, it will continue that conversation and that sort of kind of keep it in your students' minds for a while. So you're basically doing everything that you can to kind of make a slow mountain out of this, not just a blip on the radar, but you're going to really ramp up to their visit and really, keep on milking that visit for all that it's worth, because it's worth a lot. And making sure that your students keep on thinking about it, keep on making more connections and relations to that visit. And there was one other thing. Yes, if you are bringing in somebody who is, something about their identity is not well represented in their work. So a female composer, a BIPOC person in the classical world, anything like that. Make sure that you have a conversation either before, or preferably before, with your students, especially your older students, who can have more of this conversation about the fact that, look at all these composers that I have on my wall. Do you notice that most of them are men? When you think of a jazz musician, describe who you see. And then afterwards, see if they have any different opinions or expectations about the type of person that they just learned about. So making that connection, not just to what did you learn musically, but what did you learn about your culture, the culture of this music, any expectations that were changed. You want to be able to have students notice that they changed their opinion or thoughts or expectations about something, and not just let it slip under the radar. Make sure that they understand that they learned something new that was not just a knowledge bit or a skill or something like that. Not that there's anything wrong with knowledge or skills, but that they made a connection to themselves personally or learned something new about somebody who is not like them.
Oh my goodness, so good. I feel like I'm just gonna clap it up for you. No, that's so good. You broke that down so well, because I know those are questions I've had before. Okay, the guitar player came. Now what do I do? I didn't want it to just stop there, but I was like, what do I do now? And I didn't do a lot of preparing my students ahead of time. They knew he was coming. They were excited because I kept getting you need to have this guy in, but there wasn't a lot of let's talk about who he is, why he plays guitar. It was just like, hey, his dad's coming today. And it was like, why? Who? What's the point of this?
Right.
So yes, I love all of that. It's just like developing a lesson plan. This is part of your lesson plan, where you are going to do basically a pre-assessment and then the lesson itself and a post-assessment. Think of it that way. So I love that. And
that's exactly right.
Yes, it's exactly what it is.
That's exactly right.
So Allison, do you have any other advice about this topic that you can share with the listeners today?
I would say I covered a lot, but I think one thing to keep in mind in general about bringing a guest in is that it's not just about trying to bring in, okay, we want to talk about Hawaiian music and I'm bringing in somebody who's a specialist in Hawaiian music. It's not just about that genre or that technique or that skill. That what you're really doing is helping students understand that there doesn't have to be, and there really isn't, it's just an illusion of the boundaries surrounding music and your classroom. That what they learn in your classroom is boundless and endlessly wonderful and looks like an endless amount of opportunities and options for them. That's what you're really doing when you bring in a guest artist, is you're showing students the amazingness and the multitude of opportunities that exist within music and that exist within them that they just don't know about yet. So that's really what you're doing.
Yes.
It's really what you're doing, is that you're just breaking down walls and barriers, and you're showing your students their own possibilities. Yes, it's a pain in the butt to write grants. Yes, it's scary to bring in somebody that you don't necessarily know very well. Yes, you don't know what's going to happen before, during, and after. And yes, there's going to be some student who deeply embarrasses you in front of somebody who's famous. Do it anyway.
Yeah.
Do it anyway, because that one little thing, and I have a hilarious story about a kid embarrassing us in front of a famous person that I'll get to later. But it's just worth it, because that one little thing is just going to be a blip on the radar and a funny story you tell on a podcast one time. But for everybody else, it's going to be life-changing, and you should do it.
Yes.
Just do it.
Yes. Okay. You have to share your story.
Okay. So, so I was a counselor at the NISA School of Orchestral Studies for like 3 summers. This is upstate New York. This is Saratoga Springs, and they have the Philadelphia Orchestra does their residency there every summer. So part of the summer program is you see like a dozen Philadelphia Orchestra concerts, which is incredible. And every summer they have ridiculous guests, you know, the most famous people in classical music. And one of the summers they had Yo-Yo Ma, and I love Yo-Yo Ma. And I knew I liked Yo-Yo Ma, and then I saw him perform live, and it literally changed my life. Like seeing him perform live, I completely changed how I thought about performing music. And so I think it was probably during intermission, or maybe it was after the concert. There was a spot in the concert hall, or actually the amphitheater, where you could go to like the loading dock, and the performers would come out, and all of our kids knew this. And they're big, you know, orchestra nerds. So they go to the back and they're like waiting for Yo-Yo Ma to come out. And Yo-Yo Ma is like the sweetest, most generous, loving human in the entire world. He's just, we need to protect him at all costs. Aww. And so he's answering questions from, you know, all of our little nerdy orchestra kids. And this one kid had the gall to raise his hand and ask, how come you took the third movement of the Shostakovich so slowly, or something like that? How come you played that movement so slow? And all of the counselors look at him and were like, what are you doing? What are you doing? What is wrong with you? And of course, Yo-Yo Ma just like laughs it off, and he's like, I'm just getting old. And I was like, you're so precious. You are so in trouble.
Oh my gosh.
I could not believe he said that. We were so embarrassed. We were like, I'm so sorry that he said something, you know, obviously it wasn't that big of a deal, but that he asked this question. And, you know, it's like a fairly reasonable musical question, but at the time it was just like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
How dare you? But what was so great about seeing this person in person was that he could ask this kind of silly, like high schooler question, and Yo-Yo Ma could react as a person. And you could really realize that Yo-Yo Ma laughs at your stupid question and gives you like a fun answer to say, you know, I'm getting old. You know, it's really nice to just have musicians be people, because sometimes we build them up so much, especially the really famous ones. We build them up so much. Meeting them in person is really wonderful.
So cool. Because students connecting with these musicians who maybe they have learned about a music class, or they've listened to them on the radio, or have seen them in a live performance, but meeting them, they go from this performer or musician to, like you said, a person. And it's, oh my goodness, they're just a normal person, just like I am. They just
occasionally that is disappointing. I've had Bruce Hornsby closed the door on my face once, and I will never recover from that. I was like, no, be nice, be a nice person. I think he's a nice person. I think he was just tired. But hey, musicians get tired, and they are not beholden to, you know, all of their fans' questions all the time.
Oh yeah.
So it's fine.
Well, before we go, I would love for you to share with listeners where they can connect with you after this episode online.
Yes. The best place to find me is on my Instagram page, and all of my handles are The Critical Good. Don't forget the Critical Good. So The Critical Good on Instagram and on Facebook and on Twitter, same handle, and also on my website, thecriticalgood.com.
Okay, awesome. So you guys make sure to reach out to Allison after this episode if you have any questions. And honestly, just go see what the work she's doing on her website and connect with her on social media, because she's definitely someone you want to follow and continue connecting with, because I love following you on social media. You share so many good ideas. So yes, so make sure you connect with her. Well, thank you, Allison, so much for coming and sharing with us today. This has been amazing.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Jessica. I had a really good time.
Well, hey there. Thank you so much for listening into the Elementary Music Teacher podcast. There is an exclusive Facebook group just for listeners of this podcast and any elementary music teacher called the Elementary Music Teacher Community Facebook group. Come on over and join us there where we have conversations around the podcast episodes and encourage each other each and every week. And also head to my website, thedomesticmusician.com. I have some free resources there that you can download to help you gain traction in your classroom today, as well as the blog and the membership site and all kinds of other goodies to help you keep going in your music teaching journey. I cannot wait to keep connecting with you and encouraging you and spurring you on in your journey of teaching elementary music. Hang in there, have an amazing week, and I will see you soon.